we are gonna have to hate on set 11 a little bit today and talk about set 12. I think because it's just they're very very different, at least so far. And I think it's hard to talk about what seems to work in set 12 without also addressing what really didn't work in set 11.
Mm-hmm.
I think the core of it though is that like there's just more TFT to be played again. I think there are a couple of big reasons. Uh, Actually, I was doing some coaching yesterday too, and I like over the course we were talking about the trait web, and I think that's maybe the biggest thing about this set because some things didn't change. Right, we talked a lot last set about the system changes that kind of made the meta more like fast eight, less playing early mid game. Like the
Mm-hmm.
damage changes and the odds changes made it so that it didn't feel like super rewarding to play stage 3. There were certainly patches where like, it felt more or less rewarding. It got a little bit better, I think, by the end, but it was still, there were pains there, I would say, especially for us who like to play the game months before stage
Yeah.
4. Um, and so I think what it boils down to as well is I think initially I had thought that those were like the main reasons why the set felt like that, and to an extent, I'd say they were like a very large part of the reasons. But it turns out the trait web also just kind of sucked. So trait web really meaning like how the traits interact and like how the units within the traits are presented, right? So I think I'm pulling up some set 11 stuff right now. Even looking at it is giving me the heebie-jeebies, but it has to be done because I want to look at the team builder real quick, and I'll share my screen real quick because this is just this is the set 11 stuff. Let's see, there we go. And so some of the best boards in set 11, right? The way these traits fit together is absolutely fucking insane. Like so, for example, one of the best. This is set 12. Oops, I just clicked team builder. This is set. We'll get set 12s first then. Set 12s, right? The synergies I think across the board are just a little less powerful. Right, we can look at some of them. Like the frontline synergies are, there's no like your team just take your frontline takes 20 to 30% damage less. There's no warden, which that's great.
Mm-hmm.
There's no like I think like in general it's just there's less. But the really cool thing about the trait web in this set, and this is what's making the set so good in my opinion, and so different set 11, which we'll talk about in a second. But so if you look at the front lines in set 11, right? So I had a moment yesterday when I was in a game and I wanted to fit Arcana on my board, right? And so I was like, okay, well I'll play TK2. I was like on a fast 9 thing, and I was like, okay, I'll play TK2 Vanguard, and I'll just play like a Zareth or
Hecarim.
whatever. Yeah, exactly. Hecarim or Zareth, whatever. And I didn't want to play TK because TK is he's the big CC guy, kind of like the Nautilus of the set. And then I was like,
Mm-hmm.
man, there is not a single fucking Vanguard that I felt good about playing on my board at that point in the game, besides the Nautilus, or besides the TK. And that's amazing. That's so good, right? Because TK, very, very, very high quality unit, right? He's a board wide CC kind of thing. Same thing as Nautilus. But if you look at Nautilus versus TK, how easy was Nautilus to play, right? Warden,
Mm-hmm.
literally easiest synergy in the game to play. There's 18 trillion amazing Wardens. Vanguard, Mordekaiser's a 3-cost Eldritch Vanguard. You can pick a couple 2 costs if you want. You got your Rumble, you got your Galio, who has good tags, but maybe the shittiest spell known to man. And then you have Warwick and Blitzcrank, which are both 1 costs, right? And so that's the beauty of it. And we'll talk about we'll get into that more. But the beauty of it is really that like these units to play a good unit, there's actual trade off in set 12 compared to set 11 where the really good units were also tied to really good traits and were just like kind of full of traits, right? So a good example of that is that I just said Galio, total shitter, right? Um, Great synergies. He has a frontline synergy. He has Mage for your backline. He has Portal. Rumble's a similar thing where it's like, yeah, Sugarcraft, Vanguard Blaster. Sugarcraft's like less good of a synergy, so he's a little bit better of a unit, I would say. He's actually fine, I think, as far as units go. He's decent, and his hero augment's cool. But that is to say that like these units are three traits, and because they're 3 traits, they're pretty bad as far as like a frontliner goes. Right? Like Rumble's really not the tankiest guy in the world. Like you can carry him for
Mm-hmm.
sure, and he gives you some good stuff, but he's not something you really want on your board. It's not a high unit quality thing. He's not if you're playing like Vertical Blaster or Vertical Sugarcraft or something, he's not going to be the tanky guy. He like lets you play TK, I guess, but there's still that downside where because he's giving you more synergies, he's taking away from your unit quality on your board. Where again, like in set 11, think of the most notorious 3 trait unit in set 11 was Alawi.
Yeah.
Who just also happened to be like one of the best units in the set. So there was no trade off there, right? Like when you put Alawi on your board in set 11, there were like you were getting 3 good traits. The unit quality was amazing. It was super easy to slot in like a billion different things, and it made it too easy, but it was too seamless, right? There was no give and take, and you can see that in a lot of the set 11 boards that were very good and very popular, and why set 11 felt like almost kind of like solved-ish by the end, where the reason why people could just go to level 8 and play infinite 4 costs is because all the 4 costs fit together like on these nice little 2 pieces, right? Like 4 and 5 costs. Like you can play Orin plus Azir plus Lilia plus Nautilus plus Udyr plus Lowy plus whatever. It all fit together too seamlessly. And so these things would click into place, and that it would become very hard to play a less, I'm gonna say like generic board, a less like kind of on rails type of comp, because the comps became very solidified in that stuff was so easy to play. There was almost always like this optimal like high cost version of your board you could play where you could just take generic augments, right? You didn't need to know how good a certain thing was for your board, generally speaking. You could just say, this is generically decent. I can level up. I can play all these really good units. Like, right, Syndra Faded, the Lilia stuff. There are a couple variations of that, but they were all pretty straightforward. The Kane Heavenly stuff. Everything was so like everything was very solved feeling. Those are the boards you could play. If you try to play something else, you're probably going to do very poorly because those boards fit together so well and the unit quality was so high while they fit together so well that you just get rolled over, right? But if you look at all the 4 costs in this set, we can even just go here real quick. I've never been so happy that it is so hard to fit 4 costs. Let's just make a board full of 4 costs, right? They're like you could just slap an Ornn and a Nautilus and a what's the other 4 cost frontliner? I already forgot. I have like put it out of my mind. There was another one, right? It was Ornn,
Yeah, I
Nautilus.
already
And,
dropped a
like,
lot of set 11 in my head.
yeah, it's like Silas and Galio, right? Like literally two
Oh,
4
yeah.
costs that shared a tank synergy, and yeah, so that made it very easy, right? Now there's a couple, right? You can play like Fiora plus Gwen, but they're not your front line. Actually, I'm sharing the wrong screen now. 1 second here. Let me here we go. So there's Fiora Gwen. I think I just actually accidentally shared the exact same thing. Actually, 1 second.
You have Callista and Rakan, and then
Yep,
Nasus and
I did it again.
Varus.
Okay, wait, this time I'll actually get it. What the heck? Okay, set team builder. No, this one. Yes. Okay, we got it. We got there. So there's a couple, right? So these two fit together. Nasus, Varus fit together. Rakan and what's her face fit together. You can tell. I mean, the first big thing I think to notice that there is no overlapping like generic frontline synergy in any of this, right? There's not 2 vanguards, there's not 2 bastions, there's not 2 shapeshifters. That's massive. That's absolutely massive because it means that if you're going 8, you're not able to just like if you're like there's much less incentive to just go 8 with a billion gold because you're rewarded less, right? Because you're not playing you're not playing Silas Galio 4 cost, 4 cost, 4 cost, 4 cost, 4 cost. You're playing like Nasus plus Varus plus 3 cost plus 3 cost, maybe 2 cost synergy bot, etc. So that is to say there's less value there's less value you can put on a board in general on 8. If you can hit the 5 costs, right? Like there's between the 4 costs and the 5 costs, there's actually not that much overlap as well. There's a 5 cost Bastion, but like Tarek's synergies are not very good, right? Portal is like a pretty hard synergy to play around. I think unless you can play a 3 portal, but it's kind of hard to fit a lot of portal on a board unless you're playing very strictly for it. There's no Vanguard in the 5 cost, which is maybe the best decision they've ever made in there. Like, it's a beautiful decision because if you're playing TK, there's no like big 5 cost Vanguard out you could hit, right? Like you have to play one of the shitters if you want Vanguard, or you have to be willing to have less frontline than the alternative. Again, like Shapeshifter, there is technically a 2 piece between Briar and Nasus, but like Briar kind of wants some time to scale and also doesn't have great synergies because it's just Eldritch. It's like Eldritch. 3 Eldritch isn't going to do a ton. 3 Portal isn't going to do a ton. It can make your board a little bit stronger, but it's not something you play around super strictly. Preserver is maybe like the actually the somewhat insane two piece here, where
Yeah.
like Rakan Morg is just nasty. Morg, very good unit. I think she does do a lot. But she kind of wants to be 2-starred very badly to actually do a lot, but that's
Yeah.
probably the big
And it
overlap, right? Because there's
fits.
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
It also fits with Zillion and Camille really well.
Yep, but you have to play that Zillion, which is nice, right? So you play like the Camille and then you play like some of these fairies, but you require a lot of 5 costs to make those click together, and you're not going to find all those in 8, which is really nice. You can go 9
Mhm.
maybe, but you're not going to like. You need so much more in the 5 cost pool to actually make these units, these 4 costs fit together. That there's so much more game to be played. Um, you know, we'll talk about charms obviously because that's a very important part of the set. But I think the first most maybe most impactful thing in the set is just how the trait web is laid out. There's just so much more room to, and as a PBE, and we'll see how people optimize stuff. But I would be very, very, very shocked if we ended up in like the same landscape that set 11 was, where it was just like go wait, buy a bunch of 4 costs, do whatever you want. Because now playing around stage 3 feels way better because these 3 costs are on your board for a long time, right? These 2 and 3 costs. Hecarim on your board for a super long time. Bard can be on your board for a super long time. Hui, right? The unit quality is also just great, and there's no like right. For example, there's in the talk of like unit quality versus like synergy potential. Like Mordekaiser is a great example of this. Where Mordekaiser has ass synergies. Eldritch Vanguard, right? Like you get to play TK, sure, but like Eldritch isn't doing too much. Generally, like 3 Eldritch is not something that's super impactful, generally speaking, right? It's no Alawi where you get like your ghostly and your arcanist and your whatever. It's no Mumu where you get your crazy porcelain synergy for your hyper carry. This doesn't do anything for your hyper carry. But the trade off of that is that Mordekaisers are a super good unit. And so if you want to tech in 3 Eldritch, just like play around a Mordekaiser, or there was a game today where I played Mord strictly because I had like combat caster. Um, and because I had Comic Caster and I was playing on this Mord front line, he was tankier than like any of these 4 costs would have been. And I was able to leverage that really well, even though he wasn't giving me a lot synergy wise, but he was giving me a lot. Like 2 Vanguard Comic Caster, this guy casts so frequently, he gets so much damage reduction from the shielding that he gets from Comic Caster that he just becomes a monster. And so he doesn't turn on a lot of synergies, but he lets you play a style of board or a win condition. He lets you play really well around a certain type of resource, which is what I've been talking about, with you for forever now. Is like the idea of finding a win condition for a board, setting it up and it's like no understanding what your board wants to do based on the resources that you have, whether it be augments or items, right? If you have like bruisery items, you play for like bruisery type stuff, not necessarily just like Olaf. If you have combat caster, maybe you play for like mages or you play for like something that abuses that really well. Same idea as like artifacts, right? But not quite as on the nose, where it's like you get forbidden idol, you hard force TK because it's broken as hell with forbidden idol. Not quite as on the nose as that was in set 11. And it takes a little bit of like outside of the box thinking or just deeper thinking in general to figure out what exactly we want to play, and that's what we've been working on for forever. And in set 11, that kind of got really tossed to the wayside, right, in favor of like this play style where it's like take things that are generically decent, play around these boards that have like either insane synergy potential because the things fit together too well. Like the ward, like Ward and Ash or like Ward and Sniper stuff. It's not the highest unit, wasn't the highest unit quality last set, but everything just fit together so perfectly that it was like very, very, very difficult to ever beat it. You won't see that this set, right? You won't see like the faded Syndras. I might be wrong, but I'm very confident that you won't see that to the same degree this set. Where like, I don't think there will certainly be boards that people play towards, right? Like I think, I'm sure in the games you've played, you've probably seen a lot of Callista and you've probably seen a lot of Varus. I think those are probably going to be the 2 things.
Mhm.
I think like Callista, Varus, Gwen, and Fiora are probably the 4 units you'll see people play for the most. I think Rise is actually up there as well because he's just a generic AP carry. Because those are the kind of units that you can kind of play similarly to last set, and that you just kind of like turn your brain off, go 8, take generic things. Say I'm playing AP, you roll down, you hit your 4 cost, whatever. You can do that to an extent, but the beauty is that you can't do that and then beat the guy who knows that combat caster and Mord can go really crazy and like rolls down on 6, hits Mord 2, streaks mid game, maybe like sets himself up to reroll Mord, and then make some fun board around that, like a front to back ramping thing around this idea of an unkillable Mordekaiser. You won't beat them anymore. They will beat you finally. The person who's planning it out and like really playing around the resources well and optimizing everything will do super well. I think there's some great examples in that in the augments as well, actually, that they've added.
Hmm.
I'm going to talk about this because this is, I think they added like one of my favorite augments of all time, um, for this style of play, and there's a bunch of them as well for what it's worth. But I think in particular, there's one. Where is it? I'm sure you've seen it. It's the Randuin's one, which is like kind of unassuming, right? It's
Oh
like your
yeah.
Randuin's gets longer range and is better, but that augment totally enables you to play a completely different style of game than you normally can or than you normally would, where you just play like vertical shapeshifter with that and like build a
Hmm.
rage blade and literally play anything you want in the back line, and it's super good. It's like a very real way to make a win condition that is enabled, but not you don't have to like force that, right? There's like other ways you can play it as well, but it lets you set up a win condition and then play for like a flex back line. And essentially, between augments and the trait web, they've done a really good job making the game way more flexible because units are better and traits are. I wouldn't even say traits are worse because there are some crazy traits that are like Honeymancy, for example, is like insane amount of flat damage amp, which is nuts. I think like for example, like Portal, like 3 Portal on stage 2 is very good. Slate Fairy can be fine, but where there's like decent power in the traits, the overlap in the traits is so much less prevalent. It's so much less obvious and so much harder to actually like get to. Where you're almost always now having some kind of trade off, right? And I'm sure you've, whether consciously or not, you've had to make a lot of hard decisions over your course on PBE of like, do I play this unit? Do I play that unit? There's nothing that fits perfectly in every situation, which is so cool because the ideal TFT, in my opinion, is that like there should not be like these perfect boards that just solve every situation, right? And they've really moved away from that, I think, with the trait web this set, which is great. So that's to start off why that's like basically how set 12 I think differs the most from set 11. Um, and yeah, it
Cool. I
will
love the
definitely be
intro.
reflected, I think. Yeah.
So
Any
I
yeah.
think
Go
that
ahead.
also like speaks to, for example, Dish Soap winning set 11. I feel like he's notoriously been great at like the whole idea of finding direction early, optimizing a line, playing around four costs, level eight,
Yep.
and then he wins the world championship on
Yeah,
that.
he is the poster child for that. Yeah, for that play style.
Yeah.
He's very good at it.
So if what would you rate like the level of inflexibility in set 11, let's say from 1 to 10, where like let's say 10's the most inflexible and like 0 is the most flexible possible TFT that can be played, like where would you rate set 11, and then where would you guess set 12 might land on that scale?
Yeah, I guess I guess we'll set the scales a bit in that I think the least flexible set of TFT of all time was probably 9.5, right? In the emblem meta where you on 2-1 you would hard commit pretty much every game with an emblem. I think that
Yeah.
was probably the least flexible TFT has ever been. So and on that scale, I'd be a 10, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is our
That
10.
that was the
Um,
that was the set that I got to the final day in the cup because I could just optimize the shit out of that.
I mean that's totally fine too, right? Like again, you said there are players, and that's not to say like there wasn't a lot of skill expression in set 11 because there certainly was. It just wasn't like skill expression that I was interested in, I guess, or that I
Mm-hmm.
found very fun, and that's why I strayed away from it. But there certainly is still a lot of skill expression with like just optimizing lines and finding these tiny little edges. Um, Personally, I prefer the game. I have more fun with the game when it's more about or when like the edge can be found more in like the mid game and how you get there rather than where you end up. Right? Like I think how
Mm-hmm.
you get there is the coolest part of TFT personally. But so that's
It
the 10.
definitely
Set 9.5
increases the
is the 10.
replayability. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. You can play like a billion games of set 6 and never get bored. But I play like 10 games of set 11. I'm like I cannot play this game anymore. Um, good sign
So
that I've
what
played like
would
a
you
billion
put
games of
set 11
PB.
at?
Yeah, set 11, I would say. I mean, I don't think it was like a 9. It was probably like a 7 or like a 7 or an 8, somewhere around there. It was not
Mm-hmm.
flexible. You had to have a very good idea of what you were playing towards very early, and then I mean, the problem was that a lot of it was kind of manufactured by the system changes, and that like you kind of had to go 8 a lot of the time. You had to kind of play for going 8, and then because of how the system changes ended up making the mid game go, and so you had to commit earlier because you had to say, okay, well, if I'm going 8, I know I need all this money, and so I'm going to like build items and give us money to try to roll down for this certain thing, right? I think you see it a lot in the tournaments too, like people would almost always do that. And then if they had the right, they hit the right stuff, it worked out well, then they do very well. And again, there's a lot of skill expression in like optimizing little things in the mid game, as well as just like understanding when you can stop rolling on 8. And I'd say that one lends itself a lot more to skill expression on level 8, and just like understanding when you can stop rolling and what exactly on level 8 slash like knowledge checks, like how well do you know how do you know if this item is like zero point 0.5 better in the stats, 0.05 placement better in the stats than that item, and like how well did you understand how each little thing, how much each little tiny part of a comp wants to function. But yeah, I think it's probably a 7 or 8 because you saw it commit very early, and you had to kind of go 8 a lot of games, and it just didn't feel amazing. There wasn't a lot of like
Mm-hmm.
flexibility in terms of what you could you couldn't like change what you're gonna play in the middle of the game very frequently. Similarly, you couldn't really like play the game in a cool way in the mid game very frequently. Like most games played very similarly, right? Whether you're playing Ash or Lilia or whatever, most games played very very similarly in how you actually rolled and like the times you rolled and the tempo of the game. Where I think a lot of flexibility for me not isn't just like how many different comps you can play or like how often can you pivot in the middle of the game. It's also how much you can change how you got there, right? How much can you play around with tempo while you're getting there? How much can you roll on 6? How much can you like roll on? You have a reason to roll on like 3-3 randomly or something. I'd say
Mm-hmm.
like a 7 or an 8, maybe even like an 8.5. I wouldn't go a 9, but it was definitely one of the more inflexible sets of TFT, by like a pretty large margin. I would say it's like top 3 or 4 inflexible sets of TFT that I've played at least.
And
I would
and
say,
I feel like
sorry, go ahead.
set 11 encounters too. I feel like when we were in this state during PvE last set, we were like saying like, oh, encounters is going to increase the flexibility of the game. But then like if there was a Kha'Zix encounter, for example, like yes, it kind of increases the way you would play the game that game, but then everyone's playing that way. So it
So it
kind
didn't
of,
feel like it, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
whereas charms, because it's per player, it can increase the branch factor in a way that like encounters could never do.
Yeah, I think there's one thing that I saw in the set that I think resonated with me a lot, and or resonated is the wrong word maybe, that stuck with me, and that it was a video of Mort talking about the tempo in a game. Right, this is right before system changes. I'm pretty sure
Mm-hmm.
of the player damage and whatnot, and he was talking about how the average the average like strength of a player in a game of TFT, right, and he had a line that went up like this, and I was like pulling my hair out watching it because I was like, no, more, no, no, that's not how it works. Everyone shouldn't have the exact same tempo. Maybe one guy's like that in the lobby,
Right.
but there's one guy going like this, there's one guy going like this, there's one guy going like that. It goes all over the place.
Yep.
And that's the beauty of TFT, right? Is that like you can play with the tempo, you can choose when you want to spike, you can do all of that, and encounters like were fake. They ended up being like fake variability almost because they affected everyone in the same exact way for the most part. They
Mm-hmm.
made some people just straight up better than other spots because if you get Kha'Zix right after spending a bunch of gold, like you're like, oh man.
Yeah.
Right, or like the Cho'Gath one I think was a great example of that, where like you almost always had to take the items because you just would be in a really bad spot if you were down 3 components, but then if you were rerolling while that popped up, you were just kind of boned. Like it was very very
Mm-hmm.
difficult. And so like they affected players like kind of technically all in the same way, but also made some players spots just like better for no reason, essentially for like no real skillful reason. um and then because the set was so inflexible in terms of like and I think it's like a lot of things, like the trait web was so inflexible in terms of what could be played, and like there were just these very very insanely optimal setups at all times that you couldn't really react to it well because everyone's gonna be playing for those optimal setups, right? And you see that at like regionals and worlds and stuff, like everyone just playing for the optimal setups. Like there's a game like replay where there is a game one game at regionals where I watched where replay won, and it was like everyone was just going fast eight. Dish Soap had an insane spot. He ended up going like seventh because he rolled down and missed Ash, and he was only playing for Ash. And Replay was only playing for Lilia, rolled down, hit like Lilia 2, Silas 2, Nautilus 2, and won the game. And it's like, uh, yeah, I like the problem is like you can't really play for other things in either of their spots because then they're just too strong. The comps were just too strong. And with encounters making it so like I guess counters like really made it's like you would want to pivot in spots, but you couldn't because again, like there were just all these factors against you. But charms are very cool in that charms are it's kind of what encounters really should have been, right? Where it's like it is very player to player. Where if I want to play a high tempo game, and I do this a lot right now actually on PBE. If I'm trying to play a high tempo early game, I don't have to now that you have options, right? I don't need to send pump 30 gold leveling to get to level 7. I can instead say, okay, well, I think I'm almost going to beat them, so I'm going to instead roll for a charm and maybe one pair. And so I roll like 3 or 4 times on 6. And then I get like a charm I want that I think beats them, or like I get an upgrade that I think is enough to beat them. And an econ charm even maybe, right? Or like a lesser Nico or something like that. And then all of a sudden like, oh, well, I chose to get stronger here. I chose to change the tempo of my own game, and because of that, I'm getting rewarded. Which again is what we've talked about for so long, and really what good skill expression in TFT is. I think is being able to make those decisions that kind of break the mold, because there should never really be the mold should never be like the best way to play the game in every situation, which I think is what they were trying to make the game be in set 11, where it was like they made it so that going fast 8, which was what most people try to do anyways, was the best thing to do in almost every situation, right? Whether you're lose streaking or win streaking, whatever, that was the best thing to do. Now there's like much more ability to do different things in stage 3. Again, partially because charms, which they reward you for rolling. Right, I played like a game of Vagar today where I literally rolled for a charm every single turn because I had trade sector, and so I rolled for upgrades and a charm every single turn with Vagar. And I rolled Vagar because I had it, because I knew I'd be rolling for charms every single turn, and it was like an insane board by the end of the game because I leveraged these little things to kind of make this optimized version of what my exact game could be, right? And no pun intended with the B. um, and so
I
made
played
so
a
many
game
B
with
puns.
Vagar as well. Vagar and Xerath with because you get the TK Vanguard with the Galio as well. Like that caps out so high.
Yeah. Vagar feels really cool. There's so many ways to play him too. Like I played like a 5B variant with like rerolling, but you can definitely like hit him quickly to go 9, play Arcana stuff, and just like go crazy. There's so many different variations, right? And the cool thing is that in some spot, like in a trade sector spot, you probably play the reroll 5 honey, whatever board that I played. In like a spot where you have more econ, maybe, or hitting more Vagars naturally, maybe you probably play the Arcana version that you played. There's no just like strictly optimal line there's all these little factors that can actually change how a board wants to be played. And again, a lot of that is because the trait web is such where like there's just not these like super hyper optimal boards, at least yet. Again, as PBE, people will find the closest thing to those for sure. They always do. But I think that the chance of them being as high cap as the boards in set 11 were, right? The chance of there being like a 5 faded 4 Dryad Syndra board equivalent in this set is very, 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 very unlikely. Like incredibly unlikely. Because just these little like units interact so well with all these little pieces, the augments, the charms, etc.
So, given all that, what would you rate like the level of inflexibility of set 12? Like less than a 5?
Yeah, I honestly, as of right now, again, take it with a grain of salt because it's PBE, and the meta will surely change quite a bit as it goes live. But as far as PBE goes, I think like a 2 or a 3. Set 6 being like a 0
wow.
maybe in the scale, like set 6 being like a 0, set 10 being like a 1. Yeah, I would say this is like a 2 or a 3. It feels really good. Like I feel like there's so many different ways you can play the game, and again, I I think what we talked about for forever finally feels good again. Like in set 11, it felt so bad to play win condition oriented, right, and to play like the board more conceptually and based on how you want to play a fight. But in this set, because there's so many, it's so much harder to find these optimal setups, right? Like I think set 11 was very much a set of like practicality. It was a set of like, or I guess it wasn't a set where you could cook, in that it wasn't a set where like cooking got you far because just everything on paper was too strong, right? Like the synergies fit together too well. The units kind of fit together too well, and like were too good in these like hyper optimal comms. And so because there wasn't cooking to do, because you could just solve it all on paper very easily, right? There wasn't a lot of like theory behind, or like the macro wasn't as fluid, I guess. There wasn't as much imagination in the macro because you could solve the set on paper, in my opinion, in set 11, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot, it's rare that you can, and this is actually why I don't do a lot of theory crafting in PBE. I mean, if you love theory crafting in PBE, because a lot of people do. I know a lot of people who like spend the whole PBE cycle theory crafting comps and stuff, right? And that's awesome, and that's fun to do for people. The reason I don't do that is because I don't think TFT is a game, generally speaking, that you can solve on. The further the set goes, the more small the set becomes in terms of like the comps that get played. And certainly, again, we'll get to that point, but it's not a game that I think rewards you nearly as much for solving it, trying to solve it on paper, as it is a game that rewards you for having like these really good fundamentals in terms of understanding like where you want to go, what items work in this kind of situation, and having like really good kind of intuition for the game, right? Building up that intuition, which is kind of what we always talk about, is building up the intuition for a set. I think that goes so much further, especially coming out of a PBE cycle, than trying to solve the game on paper will ever get you. Except maybe in set 11 and stuff like set 9.5, where like again these hyper optimal comps existed, and it there wasn't a lot of macro imagination to be had because you could solve it on paper because the trait web was such, and slash like legends in set number five's case and such were what they were. But this feels like again a set where like you can cook, like you could do some cool. I played a game yesterday. There's an augment that gives you a copy of a one cost every single round the whole game. After like the first
Mm-hmm.
4 rounds, you get a copy of every single round, right? So my board at the end of the game that I won the game with was 6 portal with 3 Zoe 3s and 4 scholar. So I had 3 itemized
I
Zoe
didn't realize
3s.
you keep on getting it even after it's already 3-starred, huh? Okay.
Yep. And right, because so there's so
Wow.
much room to cook, right? And so that augment can do a lot of. So let's say you get an Eldritch unit with that, or a Portal unit with that. Portal and Eldritch can scale with star level of the units that you have played. So every other 3-star Portal unit you play scales the Portal. Every other 3-star Eldritch unit you play scales the Eldritch thing. So my Portal was out DPSing my entire board because I had like 18 fucking star levels of Portal units on my board. So I had like 3 Zoes just firing away in the back, and then this Portal just spitting out like 10,000 HP Krugs. So stuff like
That's
that
really
is
cool.
like you won't see games like that often, right? Like that's the kind of game where having a good fundamental understanding of why things work and how a board functions, right? Because that board, it was all about just having like a big solo frontline Tarek kind of thing happening, and a lot of like unit quality all around, a lot of support items like Shiv and Redemption and Sunfire and stuff, just to make sure that like the portal can do most of the damage, and then you just let it roll, right? And that's like what good TF that's what good TFT is this set so far, at least. Again, it's PBE. I don't want to. I feel like in set 11 I was like very hyped up in PBE, and then it was what it was. So take it with a grain of salt, but stuff like that works because you have an understanding of why it works. And so this set does feel very rewarding for understanding the why behind things, not just like what the end comp is, right? Understanding why the fight is going the way it is, why the board is getting stronger with certain things. And especially, I think where that maybe comes up the most is that, again, there are a lot of tough decisions to be made this set in terms of what you're going to play in a certain spot, right? Like, what are you playing on? Like, on 9, do you play this synergy or that synergy? Because now, instead of there's now a question of this or that instead of one thing that does both. Because in set 9 and in set 11, it was almost always such that like something did both, right? Something did everything you wanted. There was a next in that was everything you wished it could be. And in this set, you have to make those hard decisions, and you have to understand why something makes your board stronger in a certain spot. Like there was a great example of this today. I was going 9, I was going 10 actually on a board. I was playing like a Varus Blaster like 5 Frost board. With like Morgan Preserver on it. And so I ended up on 10, there were like a billion things I could have played, right? I could have played a Recon for another Preserver. I could have played like two like a random 5 cost. I could have played like 2 Chrono with Camille, a bunch of different things. But instead I played Shapeshifter. So I could play 4 Shapeshifter. And the reason is that I had the augment that gives your whole team 6% attack speed every 4 seconds. And so by playing 4 Shapeshifter, my front line got big enough because I had like an itemized Nasus too. My front line got way bigger, and because my front line got way bigger, that scaling let my Varus just kind of blow up the entire board by the end of the fight, right? And so I was able to play a ramping fight. And so like that element's very cool, for example, because it lets you play like a Rage Blade type win condition without the Rage Blade, which is really neat.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's a decision that it was the right decision in my opinion. Who knows, because now there's like really no right, quote unquote, right decision, but in my opinion, it was the right decision because it furthered what my board wanted to do in that situation, right? It gave me the front line to let my board ramp, to let and so it kind of fed into everything, fed into it into each other. But if you're just trying to follow a comp guide there, like no one's going to say yeah. Comp guys going to say yeah. And this, just in general, you want to make sure you're playing a Nico 1 and a Briar 1 on that board, because that's the best thing in that spot always. And in set 11, you could say that probably, but in set 12, like that is not something that it's so spot dependent now. There's not these like, yeah, I'm gonna keep saying it, but it's cool. It's very cool. There's like actual tough decisions to make now. There's a give and take. There's always a give and take in these spots now, because the straight web is so much better designed. No flame to whoever designed set 11 straight web, but it is better designed. Hopefully it's the same person. They just did better. What a beast. Instead of you flaming someone, but yeah, it feels great. It feels very fluid. It feels like there's so many more decisions to be made. There's more skill expression and just understanding what exactly it is that that actually makes your board stronger. And that applies late game just as much as it applies like stage 2 and 3, right? And now that stage 3 feels like you can play it. I mean, you can roll for a charm on stage 2. I roll for a charm on 2-6 almost every game I streak, because I'm like, oh, I want to beat that guy, so I'm going to roll for a charm here. It don't make 20. I hit the charm and then I win the fight, and then it's fine because the 3 costs, Swain 2, Shen 2, Nico 2, whatever, are very valuable units that if I'm rolling on 6 and I hit that's on my board for a long time, and I can play around that accordingly. It doesn't leave my board immediately for some big 4 cost. So yeah,